Okay, so we're going to use those marks now, and the way that we showed our shadows, midtones and highlights. We're going to start with pen because of what happened to me with my pencil, and smudging it across the page. Choose a section that, I would actually choose the section for your biro that is one of the more detailed ones, because it's we can control it a lot better than the pastel or crayon that we're going to use next. So for your pencil and your pen sections, choose a section that is fairly detailed one. I'm going to choose this one at the bottom. Okay, and what you'll need to do before you start, if you haven't already, is set up your still life objects that you had last lesson so that you can see them throughout. If for any reason you don't have access to those objects, please look back at the photo that you took at the end of, not last lesson, the previous lesson, so that you have that to refer to. So we are going to take our, we're going to start in the shadows, okay? And we're going to apply whichever marks that we think is kind of most suited to our texture. So if you remember, we could use cross-hatching, we could use scumbling like I've done there, we could use stippling, which is lots of the little dots. And that's another one. Or we could use our kind of smooth shading, which is a bit harder to achieve with Biro, but I'm sure you guys could do it. So with this one, I'm kind of just slightly moving my hand, keeping my pen quite close to the page, but really, really light. And I'm not going back and forth on the same line. I'm taking the pen off each time I move my biro. And press a little harder in the shadows. That would be our smooth shading. Doesn't look that smooth from here. Yes. And we could also just use hatching, which would just be in one direction across as well. Okay. So you're going to choose, you can change these up. So you could use one type of mark to indicate a certain texture. So say for example in my one here, if I'm going to start filling in this section now, I might use a smoother mark to try to illustrate the texture of the metal on this part of the paintbrush, and I might use kind of slightly harsher, more like hatching lines on the actual bristles of the paintbrush to try and illustrate that texture. You will start in your shadows, and I'm going to start that in a second so you can see. You'll start in your shadows, and then you will try to blend away and make sure that you keep your highlights completely blank. Okay, so we're looking for a really, really high contrast, no white gaps in our shadows at all, and we're blending through to our highlights, which are going to be empty. Okay, I'm going to move on from the biro section now. Just a few main things to just point out before we continue. With the biro, hopefully you can see I kind of used some slightly different marks to illustrate different textures. We've got some different marks like the stippling and kind of more directional pattern in the background to show the brush strokes and the leftover paint on the palette. Some smaller marks here to start to show the texture of the metal, the smoother texture, and then the longer kind of harsher brush pen marks to show the more rough bristles of the paintbrush. Hopefully you can see here that on the round objects, I've used the my marks kind of follow the shape of the outline. Okay, so this shape at the bottom and here, okay, and like at here, we call this an ellipse, and we want to follow that direction as we shade. Okay, so we kind of mimic the shape of the outline as we add our tone there. So there's a couple of things that you could think about as you move forward. As a rule, obviously I haven't quite finished this section, but as a rule we only want the brightest highlights to be empty, okay? So we want mid-tone elsewhere, and we want our full drawing to be completely full of tone. Shadows, obviously we've got very few white gaps in, and then we gradually move away from those shadows, gradually make our marks lighter and space them further apart to create the midtones, and then leaving the very, very brightest highlights only empty.